Well, we don't often talk about relative humidity in meteorology, but you've heard of it before, right? And there are probably a lot of folks on apps that will look at the relative humidity, or you'll hear from your friend or someone that will say, oh, well, the relative humidity is only 46%, so it's not very humid outside. Let me start out by saying, don't ever use relative humidity. The only time we use relative humidity in meteorology from what we call an operational or really useful standpoint is to diagnose when the air is dry enough for fire weather potential. It is not an indicator of how humid the air is, and that's really important. Let me explain here. Note how relative humidity is a percent. So what this is indicating is how much air the water can currently hold at the given temperature versus how much water is in the air right now. So again, it is relative to the air temperature. So again, it's how much water the air is in the air right now versus how much water the air can hold at that given temperature. What does that mean? Well, that means that when the temperature is cooler, the relative humidity is going to be higher. So we use dew point when it comes to that comfort level of how humid it is. But have you ever noticed on a summer-like day, it might be 90, the dew point's in the 60s where it's really humid, but the relative humidity looks low. Well, that's because it's relative to the air temperature. Warmer air can hold more water. Colder air holds less water. So again, relative humidity. This is why we don't ever talk about it. It's on some apps where relative humidity is on the app, dew point's not on the app. Always use dew point when it comes to comfort. But relative humidity is what we talk about really when we're talking about fire weather. And let's talk about this here because the risk ingredients for fires are several. Number one, above average temperatures. Number two, low relative humidity. So especially when the relative humidity is 25% or lower. That's when you know conditions are really getting dry. Number three, strong winds. That's a big factor as well. And then number four is dry fuels like dry vegetation as grass and shrubs and trees. If you're in drought conditions, obviously you're going to know you're in that drier kind of zone as well. So all of these play a big role. Relative humidity, or how dry that air is one of them. But again, let me recap here what this is. So it's how much water the air is holding versus how much water the air can hold at the current temperature, where dew point is a degree. Dew point is a measure of moisture in the air, a permanent measure, not relative to the current temperature. Relative humidity will be higher in the morning because it is colder. So you'll see those numbers again higher because colder air can't hold as much water. Use dew point for a feels like gauge, not relative humidity. So this is where you could really tell all of your friends who say, well, the relative humidity is this. Don't use it. Only use it from a fire gauge standpoint. When the relative humidity is 25% or below, winds are strong, ground is dry, there's really a higher fire risk. Now, this can be offset a little bit as well at times where maybe you have a slightly higher relative humidity, but you know that the ground is dry, temperatures are warm, and the wind is very strong. So it's also possible that you can have a little bit higher relative humidity and still have a fire risk. So again, we covered a lot here, but relative humidity is just that. It is relative to the current air temperature, and from a meteorological standpoint, it's really only useful when we're diagnosing if we have fire conditions. So always use dew point unless you're talking about those dry fire conditions. That's when you're going to start looking at relative humidity.